morning, children. This morning will be our last lesson on the Lord's Prayer. And I would love to talk with each and every one of you about what you have taken away from these lessons on the Lord's Prayer. We could maybe be outside together in our masks or talk on the computer or the phone. So just let the adult in your life know when and if you are ready to maybe share your coloring pages or to have a discussion about maybe the most important part of the Lord's Prayer for you. I would love to hear from each of you. This morning we're going to talk about the end of the Lord's Prayer, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The ending of the Lord's Prayer directly names the temptations and the hard times that all of us will face in our life. Not all of the time, but at some point in time. Now, if you'll remember, the Roman Empire took over many people groups, including the Jews, which meant that the Jews faced many struggles, especially during Jesus' day. They were poorly treated by their government, which meant many of them faced poverty, and most of them had little power. It was a challenge or a test to keep their faith in God during this really, really difficult time, to believe that everything was going to be okay, and God was still the most powerful, even when it didn't feel that way on a daily basis. The Jewish people knew stories from the Hebrew scriptures of people whose faith was tested on a regular basis. But in the New Testament, Jesus himself faces temptation at the beginning of his ministry. In that story, Jesus is tempted by Satan. Now, to be tempted is to feel the desire to make a choice that you know you shouldn't make. Worshippers of God at the time, at Jesus' time, called Satan the accuser rather than the devil, which is how you may have heard Satan referred to. An accuser meant an enemy or an opponent, a force that tried to make a person go against what they believe is right, even to do violence to test their worthiness. Now, violence is an action that hurts or damages the life of something or someone else. When Jesus taught his followers to pray, "Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil," we can think of this as keeping us from the temptation to use violence or participate in harming the life of someone or something else. Many times, we may be tempted to use power in a way that does violence. But God's way of using power, Jesus' way of using power, is to use it for good, for everyone, thinking of what will bless others and God's world rather than what is only good for us. So when we ask God to lead us not into temptation, we can think of it as a way to say, God, help us to use power in the way that you use power, by being loving, just, and compassionate. Help us to use power in the way that you are loving, just, and compassionate. Now, this could be a personal decision, like not using hurtful words or yelling at a sibling when they've upset you, or it could be a big decision that involves many, many people. Here comes the ending of the Lord's Prayer and kind of helps us to understand why it's so powerful. Early Christians began the tradition of ending this prayer with a doxology, or a word of praise. They are saying all the world, or the kingdom and the power and the glory, belong to God. Our all-powerful God is the one person, the one being, the one God who can help us live out this prayer. God is the one who will help us through and overcome temptations and hard times. God is the one who will empower us to bring God's kingdom and dreams into the world. So at the end of this prayer, we say amen, and we say it very forcefully. It's a way of saying, may it be so. It's a way of declaring, this is the way things need to be, and I'm going to be a part of it. By saying amen, we promise to help make this prayer a reality. As we end this prayer, we commit to living out the Lord's Prayer and making God's kingdom a reality today. So I want to invite you to take a look at our final coloring page. And you'll see that there are many paths, many overlapping paths, and each represent a temptation that we may face. So I want you to spend some time thinking about the temptations that you may face and how you can respond in a loving and compassionate way. So if you'll see, I've added in some ideas for myself. I don't know if you can see that. So when we feel tempted to not be ourselves, when I feel tempted to not be myself, some of the things that I do are to pray and to share how I'm feeling. When I share with someone I trust, that helps me to return to being the person God has created me to be. When I feel tempted not to care for creation, there are things that I can do to remind me about the importance of caring creation, like walking, not taking my car when I don't need to, but walking whenever I can, and recycling all the things that we use in our house. When I feel tempted not to acknowledge others, one of the things that helps me is to ask loving questions about that person's experience. And when I ask loving questions, then of course I want to acknowledge them. When I feel tempted not to speak up on behalf of those who need a voice, then I try and summon some courage. I ask God for courage to do the thing that needs to be done or needs to be said, which may require that I am very, very brave. So as you think about being led not into temptation, but God delivering us from evil, spend some time thinking about the ways in which you can respond when you feel tempted. Let's say a final prayer together. Helper God, you know the things in our lives that are tricky, those things that cause us to be burdened. Protect us and guide us away from choices that disconnect us from us and ourselves, so that we can live more fully for you and with everyone in this world. Amen.